This story is titled, "A week before our wedding, I warned my fiancée her winter trip with another man meant betrayal on our end. While she packed for her planned infidelity, I quietly did the same." Hey everyone, I'm a 29-year-old civil engineer living in Sacramento, working for a major construction company. From the outside, my life seemed perfect. I was making good money and living what most would consider the dream. But sometimes, appearances can be deceiving, as I was about to find out. One cold December evening, I decided to make dinner for my girlfriend Amanda. I prepared her favorite meal, roasted lamb with rosemary potatoes and grilled asparagus. The kitchen was filled with amazing aromas as I worked, and I occasionally glanced at the clock. It was already 8:15 p.m., and Amanda should be home soon. I set up the dining room table with care, grabbing that expensive bottle of Merlot I'd been saving for a special occasion. After lighting some candles to create the right mood, I leaned against the marble counter and found myself tapping my fingers nervously. I couldn't help but think about the past few months. They had been crazy busy with Amanda finishing grad school and me managing construction sites across the city. Tonight was meant to be about forgetting all that stress and just focusing on us. I heard the front door open with a soft creak, and Amanda walked in looking gorgeous as always. Her auburn hair fell loosely around her shoulders, and she had that confident smile I had fallen for years ago. She shrugged off her winter coat and dropped her bag by the door. I could tell by her movements that something was different. She was unusually energetic, like she had something important on her mind. She spotted me in the kitchen and called out, "Hey babe, smells incredible in here." I handed her a glass of wine, trying to be casual. "Thought we deserved a nice dinner," I said. "You've been working so hard." She took the glass but didn't drink, instead studying the table setup with curious eyes. "This is quite the effort for a random Thursday," she remarked, one eyebrow slightly raised. I chuckled at her comment. "Just wanted to celebrate you finishing the semester," I explained. "I thought we could talk about taking a trip once you're done with your final classes." I noticed how her eyes lit up at the word trip. That playful smirk appeared on her face, the one she gets when she's hiding something. She looked at me over her wine glass, her lips curled into that mysterious smile that both intrigued and sometimes unsettled me. "A trip?" she asked playfully. "What kind of trip are you thinking about?" I shared my plans with her. "I was thinking we could get away for a week or two," I said. "Maybe head up to the Cascade Mountains or fly to Sonoma Valley for some wine tasting. I know you've always wanted to go there." Amanda swirled her wine glass thoughtfully. There was something off about the way she was looking at me, like she was amused by my suggestion. She took a slow sip, then set the glass down carefully on the counter. I could tell she was carefully choosing her words. "Actually, funny you mention a trip," she said, her voice too casual to be natural. "I've already got plans." I felt my stomach drop. "Plans?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yeah, Claire and Bethany and I," she continued nonchalantly. "We've been talking about it for a while. We're going on a road trip across the country right after graduation. We've got everything planned. All the reservations are made. We're leaving right after the ceremony." I blinked in surprise, trying to process what I was hearing. "Wait, what? The whole winter?" I asked, confusion evident in my voice. She laughed and waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, come on, Ryan," she said. "It's something we've been planning since freshman year. We've been saving up forever. It's going to be amazing." I stared at her in disbelief. A cross-country road trip with Claire and Bethany, the same Claire and Bethany who get blackout drunk every weekend, who flirt with anything that moves at bars. The same friends she always comes back from parties with at 4 a.m., making me feel uneasy and concerned. The thought of her spending 3 entire months with them, miles away from me, made my chest tighten with anxiety. "Amanda, are you serious?" I asked, keeping my voice calmer than I felt. "You're really planning to disappear for the whole winter?" She shrugged like it was nothing, taking another sip of her wine. "It's not like I'll be gone forever," she replied with shocking nonchalance. "Just a few months. We'll FaceTime. Everything will be fine." I set my glass down on the counter and crossed my arms, trying my best to keep my composure. The casual way she was dropping this bombshell made my blood simmer. "You didn't think to mention this to me before now?" I asked, my voice tight with restraint. "We're supposed to be getting married soon, and you're planning a winter road trip with your party friends. How am I supposed to feel about this?" Her expression shifted then. That smirk faltered for just a second before she regained control of her features. It was brief, but I caught it. A flash of something that told me she knew exactly what she was doing. "Ryan, don't overreact," she said, her tone taking on that patronizing edge I'd come to recognize whenever she thought I was being unreasonable. It's not like I'm doing anything wrong. We've been planning this for years. I felt my jaw tighten as I processed her words. I wasn't overreacting. Not even close. This wasn't about a simple vacation or girls' weekend. This was months away with friends who I knew had questionable judgment at best. I know what Claire and Bethany get up to when they go out, I said firmly. I know how things go when the drinks start flowing and when inhibitions drop. You're really telling me you're going to spend the winter with them, and I'm just supposed to be okay with that? Her eyes narrowed slightly, and for the first time that evening, I saw real annoyance flash across her face. Ryan, stop! She snapped. I trust you when you go off on your construction sites or to those National Guard weekends. Why can't you trust me? I let out a heavy breath and leaned forward, palms flat on the kitchen island between us. It's not the same, and you know it, I countered, looking directly into her eyes. I'm gone for work, doing my job. This is different. You're going to be out there traveling, drinking, God knows what else. All winter. I shook my head, the image of her partying across the country with those two making me sick to my stomach. What happens when things get messy? When things cross a line? She scoffed and rolled her eyes at me like I was some overprotective father rather than her partner. Jesus, you sound like an old man, she said with undisguised disdain. Do you really think I'm just going to throw everything away for a few drunken nights? Come on, Ryan, I love you. This is just a trip. Relax. But I wasn't going to relax. Not this time. Something inside me had reached its breaking point, and I knew with sudden clarity what I needed to say. Amanda, if you take this trip, we're done. The words hung between us like a heavy winter fog. Her smile faded, replaced by an expression of disbelief. She stared at me as if I'd just spoken in a foreign language. You can't be serious, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I am, I replied, holding her gaze without backing down. I'm not going to sit here all winter wondering what you're doing, who you're with, or what's happening. I'm not going to be that guy who gets blindsided. So if you go, that's it. She stared at me, her eyes searching mine, trying to gauge if I was bluffing. Then, to my surprise, she laughed. A short, incredulous laugh that grated on my nerves and made my resolve harden even further. Ryan, you'll get over it, she said dismissively. You always do. You're just being dramatic. I didn't respond to her laughter or her belittling comment. Instead, I turned and walked out of the kitchen, her mocking giggles still echoing behind me. I moved down the hallway to our bedroom, grabbed my duffel bag from the closet, and started packing immediately. I didn't even need to think about it. My hands worked on autopilot, grabbing clothes, essentials, and stuffing everything into the bag as fast as I could. Amanda followed me, her voice a weird mix of amusement and confusion. Wait, you're really doing this? She asked, standing in the doorway. You're actually packing? I zipped the bag closed and slung it over my shoulder, turning to face her. You made your choice, Amanda, I said evenly. I'm making mine. For the first time that night, she looked genuinely alarmed. The reality of the situation seemed to finally be sinking in, and her confident facade began to crack. Ryan, come on, she pleaded, her tone shifting to one of concern. This is ridiculous. You're just pissed off. We can talk about this tomorrow. I cut her off immediately. No, I said firmly. I'm not waiting around to see how this plays out. I'm done. Without another word, I grabbed my keys from the dresser and walked straight out of the apartment, leaving her protest to fade behind me as I closed the door. As I drove away, I had no second thoughts. I took the winding mountain roads, and with each mile, the air got cooler and cleaner. The further I got from Sacramento, the more I could breathe again. My duffel bag sat in the passenger seat, packed with just the essentials, nothing more. I didn't need much where I was going. I was headed to my family's cabin, nestled deep in the Sierra Nevada mountains. It was far enough away from Sacramento that city life seemed like a distant memory once you arrived. The cabin had always been my sanctuary, especially after my time in the National Guard. It was where I went to clear my head, to work on projects, or just to be alone with my thoughts. Now, it was exactly what I needed after everything with Amanda. I wasn't looking back. She had made her choice, and I wasn't about to be anyone's backup plan or afterthought. As my tires crunched over the gravel driveway, I pulled up to the cabin. The wooden structure blended into the pine trees as if it had grown there naturally. I parked the truck, stepped out, and stood for a moment, taking in the familiar sight with a sense of relief washing over me. The air was crisp and sharp with cold, and the sky stretched wide above, A deep blue so intense it felt like it could swallow you whole. I unlocked the front door and pushed it open, immediately greeted by the familiar scent of pine and cedar. The cabin wasn't luxurious by any means, but it was mine. It consisted of just a large open space with a stone fireplace, a couple of chairs, a sturdy wooden table, and a small bedroom tucked away in the back. Minimal and functional, just like me. I set my bag down on the couch and stretched out my shoulders, feeling the tension slowly start to unwind. This was exactly what I needed. No distractions, no drama, just peace and quiet. But of course, that tranquility didn't last long. The next morning I had just finished my morning run when my phone started buzzing incessantly. I wiped the sweat off my face with my shirt and glanced at the screen. Amanda. The message read, "Hey, I know you're mad, but can we talk?" I ignored it. She was going to try this. She always does. Push and push and push until she thinks she can get me to fold. Not this time. I tossed the phone onto the counter and headed for the shower, letting the hot water wash away my frustration. I was halfway through making breakfast when my phone buzzed again. I glanced over and shook my head at her persistence. I had to give her credit for that at least. New messages kept coming through. "We need to talk seriously. Ryan, I miss you." Each one more desperate than the last. I rolled my eyes and muted the phone completely. It was amazing how quickly she flipped from confident and dismissive to this desperate act. I wasn't going to let her manipulate her way back into my life. Not this time. After breakfast, I headed outside to get some work done. The cabin always needed something. It was old, and with the harsh winter weather, there was always a draft that needed sealing or a step that needed fixing. I grabbed my tools and started checking the roof for loose shingles when I heard a truck pull up. I turned to see Ethan stepping out of his pickup, that signature grin plastered on his face. Ethan was a good guy. He always had been. We had served together in the National Guard, and even though he went into real estate after getting out, he was still the same straightforward, no bullshit guy I'd known back then. "Figured I'd find you up here," he said, slamming the truck door shut. "How's the bachelor life treating you?" I chuckled while wiping my hands on my jeans and climbed down from the ladder. "So far so good," I replied. "Plenty of work to keep me busy." Ethan's grin widened as he clapped me on the shoulder. "Good to hear," he said with a nod. "Heard you finally told Amanda where to shove it." "Yeah, something like that," I said, grabbing 2 beers from the cooler on the porch and handing one to him. "She didn't take it well, though." "Of course she didn't," Ethan scoffed, cracking open his beer. He leaned against the porch railing and took a long swig. "She's not used to you standing your ground like this. She's probably freaking out, trying to figure out how to worm her way back into your life." "She's already texting me nonstop," I admitted, taking a long drink of my own beer. I enjoyed the cold bite against the afternoon chill. "I'm not buying it, though. I'm done with her games." "Good," Ethan nodded, his face growing more serious. "It's about time, honestly. I don't know why you didn't cut her off sooner." He hesitated for a moment before continuing. "You've heard the rumors, right?" I frowned and set my beer down on the railing. "What rumors?" Ethan hesitated, taking another long drink before speaking again. "I didn't want to say anything while you were still with her," he began reluctantly. "But I've heard things. A lot of things about Amanda." He paused, clearly uncomfortable. "When you were away for work last year, she wasn't exactly keeping herself busy at home, if you know what I mean." I stared at him, my mind racing with possibilities. "What are you saying?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. He sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "There's talk that she cheated on you, Ryan," he said bluntly. "I heard it from a couple of people. There was this one night at that club downtown, the Summit. She was there with Claire and Bethany, and let's just say she wasn't acting like someone in a committed relationship." I felt my jaw clench as this unexpected news hit me. Even knowing what kind of person Amanda was, I hadn't expected this. I knew her friends were a bad influence, but this? "Who told you?" I demanded. "Does it matter?" Ethan replied. "The guy who saw her is reliable. Saw her getting a little too cozy with some guy, and not in a friendly way. I'm sorry, man." I stood there, staring out at the mountains, my mind working through this new information. I hadn't expected Ethan to hit me with that bombshell, but now pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together. Amanda's casual dismissal of my concerns, her attitude, the constant pushback when I brought up her friends. It all made sense now. "So she's been lying to me," I muttered, more to myself than to Ethan. "Seems like it," Ethan said quietly. "Look, man, you don't need her. You got a good thing going here. You deserve better than someone who'd pull that shit behind your back." I nodded, though my mind was elsewhere. It wasn't enough to just know this secondhand. I needed to confirm it. I wasn't about to sit back and let rumors twist in my head. If she'd done what Ethan said, I needed to hear it from someone who knew for certain. That evening, after Ethan left, I sat on the porch, staring at my phone. Amanda had sent more messages, but I hadn't opened them. Instead, I started thinking about Hannah, the woman who owned the small diner near the cabin. We'd only spoken a few times, but she seemed like the type who kept her ear to the ground. Small-town folks like her usually knew things that outsiders didn't. Maybe she'd heard something about Amanda that I hadn't. The next day, I decided to pay Hannah a visit. It wasn't hard to find her. She was in the diner, wiping down the counter with practiced movements when I walked in. "Hey there," I called out to her. She turned and brushed a strand of blonde hair from her face, smiling warmly. "Ryan, right?" she asked. "Didn't expect to see you here. What brings you by?" "Just wanted to say hello," I replied casually, "and maybe ask you a question or two." Her eyebrows rose, curiosity sparking in her eyes. "Oh, what kind of questions?" "About Amanda," I said, pausing to watch her reaction carefully. "You probably heard about what's going on between us. We broke up." Hannah gave a slight nod, her expression unreadable. "Yeah, I've heard," she confirmed. "Sorry to hear that." I shook my head dismissively. "Don't be. It needed to happen." I leaned in slightly. "But I'm hearing some things. Things that make me wonder if there's more I should know." Her eyes flicked to mine, her posture shifting slightly. "I've heard some rumors," she admitted reluctantly. "People talk, especially in a town this size." "What exactly are you asking, Ryan?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the answer. "Did she cheat on me?" Later that evening, I found myself at the small town bar with Ethan. It was dimly lit, the kind of place where people drink in silence or have hushed conversations away from the outside world. The creaky door announced our arrival as we walked in. The bartender glanced up, gave a nod of recognition, and went back to polishing glasses. We found a table near the back, close to the pool table, and far enough from the regulars who were nursing their beers at the bar. Ethan had insisted we grab a drink, claiming I needed to get out of my head for a while. Maybe he was right. Maybe I did need a distraction, though I doubted a beer would solve anything tonight. "2 lagers," Ethan called out, waving to the bartender. He turned his attention to me. "You look like you're about to solve world hunger, man. Lighten up." I chuckled and shook my head. "Just thinking about Amanda," I admitted, though he already knew the answer. "Yeah, what else?" I leaned back in the worn leather booth, the old wood creaking beneath me. "Can't stop running through everything in my head. How I didn't see this coming." Ethan shrugged. "You're not a mind reader," he said matter-of-factly. "And Amanda's always been good at hiding what she doesn't want people to know. You were busy with work, man. She took advantage of that." Before I could respond, the bartender brought our beers over. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes as I let my eyes wander around the bar, recognizing faces here and there. One in particular caught my attention. Kelly, standing at the bar, her dark hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. She was a familiar sight, usually behind the counter where she worked. Kelly had been bartending in this town for years, long before I started dating Amanda. She was always in the middle of town gossip, whether she wanted to be or not. People just talked around her, assuming the bartender didn't care or was too busy to notice. Tonight, though, she wasn't behind the bar, but seated next to some guy I didn't recognize, laughing at something he'd said, drink in hand. As I watched, I caught bits of their conversation, her voice carrying just enough to catch my attention. "So Amanda's finally going on that trip with her girls," she was saying. "Long time coming, I guess." Kelly's words hit me like a brick. I froze, my hand tightening around the bottle. Ethan noticed my sudden shift in demeanor and raised an eyebrow. "What's up?" "Kelly was talking about Amanda," I said, keeping my voice low, my eyes still fixed on her. "I think she knows more than she lets on." Ethan followed my gaze. "You want to ask her?" I nodded slowly. "Yeah, but I need to be careful. Don't want to let on too much before I know what she knows." "Fair enough," Ethan said as he slid out of the booth. "I'll grab us another round. You handle Kelly." I watched Ethan disappear toward the bar, then got up and made my way over to where Kelly was sitting. She didn't notice me at first, too busy laughing at her companion's joke. I cleared my throat, and her eyes flicked up to mine. "Ryan," she greeted me, her smile bright but a little surprised. "Long time no see. What brings you in tonight?" "Just grabbing a drink with Ethan," I replied, sliding onto the bar stool next to her. "But I couldn't help overhearing you mention Amanda." Kelly's smile faltered, just for a split second, before she regained her composure. "Oh yeah," she said awkwardly. "I didn't realize you guys were still together." We're not, I said flatly, watching her carefully. We broke up. Her eyes widened a bit. Oh, wow, sorry to hear that. She hesitated, then added, but not really surprised. I raised an eyebrow. What's that supposed to mean? Kelly hesitated, glancing at her companion, who took the hint and excused himself to the bathroom. Once he was gone, she turned back to me, her voice lowering. Look, I'm not trying to stir anything up, she began cautiously. But well, Amanda always had a bit of a reputation, you know? I didn't respond, just let her continue. Everyone knew she was wild when she was out with Claire and Bethany, Kelly went on. I figured you knew that too. But there were rumors. People said she was more than just a little flirty when she was out without you. Flirty, huh? I kept my voice steady but firm. Is that all it was? Kelly shifted in her seat, looking uncomfortable. Well, no, she admitted reluctantly. There was this one night. I don't know if I should be telling you this. You should, I insisted, keeping my tone calm. I need to know. She sighed and took a sip of her drink before continuing. Okay, so last year Amanda came in here with Peter and a bunch of other people. They were all pretty hammered and, well, things got out of hand. She and Peter disappeared for a while, and when they came back, she paused, choosing her words carefully. Let's just say they weren't exactly keeping things platonic. The bottle in my hand suddenly felt heavier. Peter? I repeated the name, feeling it burn on my tongue. Yeah, Kelly said, avoiding my gaze. I'm not saying they hooked up, but it sure seemed like something went down. After that, people started talking. I'm surprised you didn't hear about it. I stared at her for a long moment, the pieces finally coming together. Amanda hadn't just been pushing boundaries with her trip. She had already crossed the line long before any of this. Thanks for telling me, I said quietly, standing up. I didn't want to drag this out longer than needed. Kelly gave me an apologetic look. Sorry, Ryan, she said gently. I know it's not what you wanted to hear. It's what I needed to hear, I corrected her, then headed back to where Ethan was waiting. He was halfway through his beer, leaning against the bar, watching me with that familiar look, the one that said he already knew what went down. Well, he asked, though his expression told me he already suspected what I'd learned. I took a long pull from my beer before answering. Amanda and Peter, I said flatly. Last year, while I was away for work, Ethan let out a low whistle. Damn, he muttered. Guess that confirms it. Yeah, I muttered, my mind already elsewhere. It does. But now there was one more thing to do before I could put this behind me completely. The next day, I found myself standing in front of Peter's apartment. The complex was old and rundown, the kind of place where rent is cheap and nobody asks too many questions. I had no idea how this conversation was going to go, but I wasn't leaving without answers. I knocked on the door firmly. After a few moments, it swung open, and Peter stood there, shirtless, with a half-empty bottle of beer in his hand. He blinked at me, clearly not expecting to see me on his doorstep. Ryan, he slurred, his breath reeking of alcohol. What are you doing here, man? I crossed my arms and narrowed my eyes. We need to talk, I said firmly. Now. Peter glanced around nervously, as if he was expecting someone to jump out and save him from this confrontation. When no one appeared, he reluctantly stepped aside and motioned for me to come in. The inside of his apartment was even worse than the outside. Empty beer cans littered the floor, and the smell of stale smoke hung in the air. I stayed by the door, not interested in getting comfortable or staying any longer than absolutely necessary. So, I cut straight to the point. You and Amanda, last year, what happened? Peter's eyes flicked nervously to his beer. For a moment, I thought he might try to play dumb, but then he sighed and sank onto the couch. Look, man, he muttered, rubbing his temples. It wasn't like that. It wasn't just me. Amanda was flirting with a lot of guys that night. I didn't even think she was serious about you. She made it sound like you two were on the rocks. I felt a flash of anger surge through me, but kept it in check. So you slept with her? I asked bluntly. Peter flinched, then nodded reluctantly. Yeah, he admitted, unable to look me in the eye. She came on to me. I wasn't trying to screw you over, Ryan. She made it sound like she was done with you. I stared at him for a long moment. I didn't lose my temper. I didn't need to. He was already pathetic enough, drunk and unraveling in front of me without any help from me. Just one thing, I said coldly as I stepped toward the door. If I ever hear you talk about her again, I'll make sure you regret it. Peter didn't say anything, just slumped back on the couch as I left. My mind felt more clear than it had been in days. I knew one thing for certain now. Amanda wasn't the woman I thought she was. The days after my confrontation with Peter were quieter than I expected. I didn't feel the anger or betrayal as intensely as I thought I might. Maybe it was because I already knew the truth deep down. There was no room for doubt anymore. Amanda had crossed the line, and there was no turning back to what we once had. I spent most of my time at the cabin, throwing myself into work, fixing up the place, and taking care of maintenance I'd been putting off for too long. I also started helping out at Hannah's diner whenever I could. She ran the place on her own, and managing a business solo wasn't easy. But Hannah had a quiet strength about her that I admired. She didn't complain. She just got things done. I met her early one morning, tools in hand. She was working on fixing the broken heater, her hair tied back in a messy bun, grease smeared on her apron. When she saw me walking in, she gave me a tired but genuine smile. "Looks like you could use a hand," I said, setting down my toolkit. Hannah straightened up and wiped sweat from her brow. "You offering to play handyman today, Ryan?" she asked, with a hint of amusement in her voice. I chuckled. "I wouldn't go that far," I replied. "But I know my way around a heater. My dad owned a hardware store." "Well, in that case," she said, stepping aside to let me take over. She watched as I started working on the unit. After a moment, she leaned against the counter, watching me with a curious expression. "You've been keeping yourself busy," she remarked casually. "It's the only way to keep my mind clear," I admitted while focusing on the heater. "Too much downtime, and I start thinking." "Thinking about Amanda?" she asked, though it wasn't really a question. "Yeah," I said with a sigh. "But it's getting easier. I'm not torn up about her the way I thought I would be." I think the hardest part was realizing who she really was. Not just that she cheated, but that she lied so easily. I continued working as I spoke, my hands steady despite the topic. "It's funny. I thought we were solid, but now that I'm looking back, there were signs. I ignored them, thinking I was just being paranoid. But she was always hiding things from me." When I finally paused and glanced up at Hannah, I saw a knowing look in her eyes. "Sounds familiar," she said softly, crossing her arms. "My late husband, Andrew. Well, let's just say he wasn't faithful either." She sighed before continuing. "For a long time, I convinced myself it was just his way of dealing with stress. We were struggling with money and the diner wasn't doing well. But deep down, I knew it wasn't about that." I stopped working on the heater, stood up, and turned to face her. "You stayed with him?" I asked. "Yeah," she said with a bitter laugh. "I stayed for years, until the day he died in that car accident. I guess I thought it would fix itself, or that he'd come back around. But he never did." She paused, her gaze distant. "And I'm not even sure it mattered in the end. He was gone before I could figure out how I felt about it. Silence settled between us like a weight, both of us lost in our thoughts. There was something about Hannah that I hadn't expected. She had a calm strength, but there was also a vulnerability that matched my own. We were both dealing with the aftermath of betrayal, though hers was much deeper, much more drawn out. "I didn't know that about him," I said finally. "You always seem so together." Hannah shrugged, her eyes still distant. "I've had to be," she replied matter-of-factly. "You don't survive running a place like this without learning to handle things on your own. It was hard at first, but I've made peace with it. The diner keeps me busy enough that I don't have time to dwell on the past." I nodded, understanding more than I let on. "I guess we got that in common." She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Yeah," she said softly. "I guess we do." The rest of the morning passed quietly as we worked together on the heater and fixed up some of the other equipment in her kitchen. There was a comfort in the silence, in knowing we didn't need to fill every moment with conversation. Hannah was easy to be around, and I found myself looking forward to these mornings more and more. Weeks passed, and I settled into a routine. I spent half my time fixing up the cabin, patching the roof, clearing out the overgrowth, and working on the old truck my dad had left behind. The other half I spent at Hannah's diner, helping with whatever she needed. It wasn't glamorous work, but it felt good to be doing something with my hands, something real and tangible. We didn't talk much about our past after that morning in the kitchen. There wasn't a need to. We both understood what it meant to move on, even when the scars were still fresh. One afternoon, after finishing repairs on the kitchen equipment, Hannah and I sat at the counter, sharing a cup of coffee. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows through the windows. For the first time in a while, I felt a sense of peace creeping back into my life. "You ever think about leaving?" I asked her suddenly, watching as she sipped from her mug. "Getting away from all this? Starting over somewhere new?" She raised an eyebrow. "Leaving the diner?" "Yeah," I clarified. "Getting away from this town, starting fresh somewhere else." Hannah considered that for a moment, then shook her head. No, she said firmly. The diner is my home, for better or worse. It's what I know. It's where I grew up. She traced the rim of her coffee mug with her finger. I've thought about selling it, but I don't think I could ever really leave. There's too much of my life tied up in this place. I nodded, understanding completely. I get that, I said. The cabin's the same for me. It's where I go when I need to clear my head. Don't think I could ever sell it even if I wanted to. We fell into comfortable silence again, watching the horizon together. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't thinking about Amanda, or the lies she told, or the mess I'd been left with. Just quiet contentment in the moment. But of course, that peace never lasts long. The next day, I was back at the cabin, working on clearing out some fallen branches from the last winter storm, when I heard the sound of a car pulling up. I frowned, brushed the snow from my coat, and walked toward the driveway. The last person I expected to see stepping out of the car was Amanda. She looked different. Her hair was shorter, but she was wearing that familiar look of feigned innocence that I knew all too well. But the biggest surprise was how early she was back. She wasn't supposed to return from her winter trip for another few weeks. "Ryan," she said, her voice soft like she was trying to tread carefully. "We need to talk." I stood there for a moment, letting the shock of seeing her wear off before answering. "What are you doing here, Amanda?" She walked closer, her eyes searching mine for some sign of forgiveness. "I made a mistake, Ryan," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "A huge mistake. I should never have gone on that trip. I wasn't thinking straight. I just want to make things right." I crossed my arms and watched her carefully. "So now you want to make things right? After all of this?" She walked even closer, her eyes still desperately searching mine for any hint of forgiveness. "I know I screwed up, Ryan," she said, tears starting to form in her eyes. "But I swear it wasn't like you think. Nothing happened on the trip. I thought it would be fun, but I realized how much I missed you. I realized what I had, and I threw it all away." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. "Nothing happened on the trip?" I asked skeptically. "Really, Amanda?" She shook her head vehemently. "I swear," she insisted, stepping even closer. "I just want us to go back to how things were. Please, Ryan. I know I don't deserve it, but I love you. I always have." I stared at her, my mind racing. I could see the desperation in her eyes, but I couldn't tell if it was genuine or just another act. I didn't know what to believe anymore. One thing was clear, though. I wasn't the same person I was when she left. I wasn't sure I wanted to be that person again. Amanda stood there in the fading afternoon light, her face twisted into an expression I'd seen 1,000 times before, part desperation, part innocence. It was the kind of look she used when she wanted something from me. But this time, it wasn't going to work. "Please, Ryan," she started again, her voice trembling just enough to tug at someone's heartstrings. "I know I've made mistakes, but you have to understand. I never meant to hurt you. I thought the trip would help clear my head, but all I could think about was you. I miss you. I miss us." I stood a few feet away, arms crossed, eyes cold, watching her struggle to keep her composure. Her hair fell in loose waves around her face, the same hair I used to run my hands through. But now, looking at her felt like I was staring at a stranger. "I find that hard to believe," I said, my voice calm but sharp. "Because it sure as hell seems like you didn't care about us when you left for the winter, without even considering how it would affect me. And from what I've heard, this isn't about some trip. You've been lying to me for a lot longer than that." Her eyes widened, and the surprise on her face wasn't fake this time. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I took a step forward, my gaze never leaving hers. "I'm talking about Peter," I said coldly. "About what happened when I was away for work last year. I know you cheated on me with him, and I know that wasn't the only time." The color drained from her face. For a moment, the facade cracked, and she looked like a deer caught in headlights. Her mouth opened and closed as she tried to find words that wouldn't come. "Peter?" she whispered, barely audible. "Yeah, Peter," I repeated, not bothering to soften my tone. "He told me everything. So did Kelly. Don't act like you don't know what I'm talking about." She shook her head slowly, taking a shaky step back. No, she stammered. "That's not true. He's lying, Ryan. I swear." "Stop," I said firmly, holding up a hand to cut her off. "Just stop. I'm done listening to your lies. You've been doing this for a while, haven't you? Using my work trips as your excuse to go behind my back, thinking I'd never find out." Tears welled up in her eyes, but they didn't move me like they used to. I could see the panic starting to creep in, the way her breathing became shallow, her hands trembling as they reached out toward me. "Ryan, please!" she begged, her voice cracking. "It wasn't like that. Peter, he came on to me. I was drunk. I didn't know what I was doing." "Don't you dare blame this on him," I snapped, taking a step forward. "You're not a child, Amanda. You knew exactly what you were doing. You've been doing this for God knows how long. How many other guys were there?" Her lip trembled. For a second, I thought she might try to keep denying it, but then she crumbled, hands covering her face as she began to sob. "It was just him," she stammered between sobs. "I made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but it didn't mean anything. I love you, Ryan, not him. I've always loved you." I stood there staring at her, the woman I once thought I'd spend the rest of my life with, and felt nothing but cold emptiness where there used to be warmth. "You don't love me," I said quietly, shaking my head. "You love the idea of me. You love having someone to come back to when you're done screwing around. But that's not love, Amanda. That's manipulation." She dropped her hands from her face, eyes wide and desperate. "No, it's not like that," she pleaded. "Ryan, please. I'll do anything. Just give me another chance. I swear I'll make it right. I'll do whatever it takes." Part of me wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all. She thought she could just say a few words, shed a few tears, and it would all go away. That we could go back to how things were before. But we couldn't, and I wasn't interested in trying. "I don't care what you say anymore, Amanda," I said firmly. "This is over. You made your choice. Now you have to live with it." She looked like she was going to say something else, but then her face crumpled, and she sank to her knees on the snow-covered driveway, sobbing uncontrollably. "Ryan, please!" she cried, desperation clear in her voice. "I'm pregnant." I froze. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt, and I had to steady myself to keep from losing balance. "What?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She looked up at me, face streaked with tears, hands clutching her stomach. "I'm pregnant," she repeated. "I found out a few weeks ago. I didn't know how to tell you. I was scared. But it's true." I stared at her, my mind reeling. Pregnant. After everything, now she was telling me this. I could see the desperation in her eyes, the way she was looking at me, like this was her last chance to fix things. But instead of the panic or confusion she was expecting, all I felt was a grim sort of clarity. "Who is it?" I asked, my voice cold. She blinked, taken aback. "What do you mean?" she asked with nervous confusion. "It's yours, of course." "Is it?" I interrupted, my tone hard. "Because from what I've heard, it could just as easily be Peter's. Or maybe someone else's." Her eyes widened in horror, mouth opening and closing, like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "No, Ryan," she protested. "It's not like that. I swear it's yours." I shook my head, feeling the final piece of the puzzle click into place. "I'm done, Amanda," I said with finality. "You want me to believe you? Fine. Get a paternity test when the baby's born. Until then, figure it out on your own." Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't stay to watch. I turned and walked back to the cabin, the sound of her crying fading behind me as I closed the door. The days following Amanda's meltdown in the driveway were quiet, eerily so, the kind of silence that settles into your bones. It wasn't unpleasant, but it was full of the weight of things left unsaid. I didn't hear from her again after that day. Not a text, not a call. I had half expected her to reach out again with some final desperate plea, but it never came. And I was fine with that. It was over. Instead, I focused on the things that mattered, the things that made sense, the cabin, the land, and the work that came with them. And then there was Hannah. It started slowly, as these things tend to. We'd shared enough mornings fixing equipment and afternoons working side by side that I wasn't sure exactly when the shift happened. But it did. Somewhere between the quiet conversations and the comfortable silences, there was an ease with Hannah that I hadn't felt in a long time. No games, no manipulation. Just two people trying to rebuild their lives in the aftermath of betrayal. One evening, about 2 weeks after Amanda's visit, I was sitting on the porch when I saw Hannah walking up the snowy path toward my cabin. She wasn't in her usual work clothes. Instead, she was wearing a simple dark blue dress, the fabric flowing lightly around her legs as she moved through the snow. I stood up, setting down the hot coffee I'd been nursing, and met her halfway. "Hey," she said with a smile. "Mind if I join you for a bit?" "Of course not," I replied, stepping aside to let her pass before following her to the porch. She sat down in the chair next to mine. For a few moments, neither of us said anything. The sunset was casting a soft orange glow across the snow-covered horizon, and I could hear the distant sound of wind whistling through the pines. Hannah leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. "It's been a long day," she said softly. "Everything okay?" I asked, glancing over at her. She shrugged, her gaze still fixed on the sky. "Just diner stuff. You know how it is?" "I do," I agreed, though I could tell something was off. Hannah wasn't usually one to skirt around things. If something was bothering her, she usually just came out with it. But tonight there was a hesitance in her voice that I hadn't heard before. We sat in silence for a little while longer before she finally spoke again. "Ryan," she said softly, her voice almost lost in the winter breeze. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything," I replied, turning to face her fully. She didn't look at me right away. Instead, she stared out at the horizon as if gathering courage to say what was on her mind. "Do you ever feel like you're just waiting for the other shoe to drop?" she asked hesitantly. "Like things are going too well, and it's only a matter of time before it all falls apart again?" I frowned, caught off guard by the question. "Sometimes, yeah," I admitted. "Especially after everything with Amanda. It's hard not to feel that way when you've been burned before." Hannah nodded slowly, finally turning to meet my gaze. "I feel that way all the time," she confessed. "With the diner, with my life. I keep waiting for something to go wrong. I didn't say anything, just waited for her to continue." I could see the worry etched on her face, the way her hands fidgeted in her lap. "I haven't told you everything," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I felt a knot form in my stomach. "What do you mean?" She hesitated again, took a deep breath, then plunged ahead. "I've been in the middle of a legal battle for the past year," she explained. "Andrew's business partner, Cooper, he's trying to take control of the diner. Claims that Andrew made promises about handing over a portion of the business before he died." She paused, her eyes downcast. "It's been messy and I've been trying to fight it, but I don't know how much longer I can hold them off." The weight of her words hung in the cold air between us. "Hannah," I said steadily, "why didn't you tell me this sooner?" She looked down at her hands, fingers twisting together anxiously. "I didn't want to drag you into it," she admitted. "You've been through enough with your own stuff. And honestly, I was embarrassed. I didn't want to admit that I might lose everything." I reached out and took her hand, stilling her nervous movements. "You don't have to go through this alone," I said quietly. "I can help." Her eyes flicked up to mine, surprise flashing across her face. "Ryan, I can't ask you to do that." "You didn't ask," I interrupted. "I'm offering." She stared at me for a long moment. I could see the conflict in her eyes. She wanted to accept, but part of her was still holding back, still afraid of relying on someone after everything she'd been through. "Hannah," I said softly, "you don't have to be afraid of letting someone in. You're not in this by yourself." Her lower lip trembled, and before I knew it, she had leaned in, pressing her forehead against my chest. I wrapped my arms around her, holding her close as she finally let her guard down. I could feel the tension in her body slowly start to melt away as she relaxed into the embrace. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice muffled against my shirt. "I didn't know how much I needed to hear that." We stayed like that for a while, the world around us fading into the background of the winter night. There was something about holding Hannah in my arms that felt right, like all the broken pieces of my life were finally starting to fit together again. When she finally pulled back, there was a softness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She reached up, brushing a stray piece of hair from my forehead. "You're a good man, Ryan," she said quietly. I smiled, though it was tinged with a bit of sadness. "I'm just doing what feels right." She leaned in, her lips brushing mine in the lightest of kisses. It wasn't rushed or forced. It was gentle, natural, the kind of kiss that feels like coming home. When we pulled apart, her cheeks were flushed, but she didn't look away. "Stay with me tonight," she whispered. I nodded, and we stood up, heading inside the cabin together, hand in hand. The next morning, the first light of dawn filtered through the cabin windows, casting a soft glow over Hannah's sleeping form beside me. I lay there for a while, just watching her breathe, feeling an unfamiliar sense of contentment settle over me. It had been a long time since I'd woken up feeling like this, like there was something worth holding on to again. But as I lay there, the reality of what she had told me the night before started to sink in. Cooper, her late husband's business partner, was trying to take her diner, everything she had worked for. I wasn't going to let that happen. I slid out of bed carefully, not wanting to wake her, and headed into the small kitchen to make some coffee. As I waited for the pot to brew, I pulled out my phone and started making a few calls. I still had some connections from my time in the National Guard, people who knew their way around legal disputes and property battles. If Hannah thought she was going to lose her diner, she was wrong. I wasn't going to let Cooper or anyone else take it from her. By the time the coffee was ready, I had a plan. I didn't know all the details yet, but I knew enough to get started. When Hannah woke up, I'd fill her in, but for now, I let her sleep. She needed the rest, and I needed time to figure out how I was going to help her fight this battle. The air was crisp and sharp as I stood on the front porch, watching the sunrise over the ridge. Colors spilled across the sky like a watercolor painting, speckled with snowflakes. Mornings out here were always quiet, peaceful in a way I hadn't experienced in years. Life in the mountains had a rhythm to it, a constant hum of work, nature, and time passing at its own pace. It was different from the rush of my old life, and I was finally learning to appreciate the stillness. Hannah joined me after a few minutes, the soft sound of her bare feet on the wooden porch catching my attention. She came up beside me, wrapping one of my thick winter jackets around her shoulders. Her hair was still a bit tousled from sleep. "Morning," she said, her voice soft. "Morning," I replied, reaching out to pull her close. She fit perfectly against my side. I marveled at how quickly we had fallen into this routine, this quiet, comfortable closeness. It wasn't forced or rushed. It just was. We stood there for a while, watching the sun rise higher in the winter sky, painting the land in golden light. Mountains stretched out before us, miles of snow-covered peaks, and the distant sight of pine trees swaying in the morning breeze. It felt good to be here, to be part of this life with Hannah. "How'd you sleep?" I asked after a few minutes. "Better than I have in a long time," she said with a smile. "I think I finally managed to relax." I nodded. "Good, you deserve that." She glanced up at me, her eyes searching mine. "So what's the plan for today, Mountain Man?" I chuckled at the nickname. "Had a few ideas," I said. "Thought we'd start with some repairs on the cabin's heating system, then check on the generator. And after that, maybe we can talk about how we're going to deal with Cooper." Hannah's expression shifted slightly at the mention of her late husband's business partner. It had only been a week since she told me about the legal battle over the diner, but I could see how much it weighed on her. "We'll get through it," I said firmly. "I've got some contacts looking into the legal side of things, and if Cooper thinks he can bully you into giving up this place, he's in for a surprise." She let out a breath, her hands slipping into mine. "I know," she said softly. "It's just hard to believe sometimes. I've been fighting this battle on my own for so long. I guess I'm not used to having someone in my corner." "You've got me now," I said, squeezing her hand reassuringly. "You're not alone in this anymore." Her smile returned, a little softer this time, but it reached her eyes. "Thank you, Ryan," she said sincerely. "For everything." "Don't mention it," I replied, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "We've got this." The day passed in a blur of work, fixing pipes, checking the heating system, dealing with the usual winter maintenance that comes with an old cabin, and helping at the diner. Hannah and I worked side by side, falling into an easy rhythm, like we'd been doing this together for years instead of weeks. As the sun began to dip below the snow-covered peaks, we made our way back to the diner. Both of us were exhausted, but content. Hannah went inside to close up, while I stayed behind to check on a few things around the back of the building. The evening air was cool and sharp. I took my time, savoring the quiet moments as the sky darkened into shades of purple and blue. I was just about to head back when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting a message from one of the contractors I'd been working with, but when I saw the name on the screen, I froze. "Amanda." For a moment, I just stood there, staring at the screen. It was the first time she'd reached out since that day at the cabin, the day she dropped the bombshell about the pregnancy. I hadn't heard a word from her since and, frankly, hadn't given it much thought. But now here she was, trying to pull me back into her orbit. My phone buzzed again, another message coming through. I didn't even open it. I didn't need to. Whatever she had to say, it wasn't going to change anything. I'd made my peace with that part of my life. Amanda was the past, and I wasn't going to let her derail the future I was building with Hannah. Without a second thought, I deleted the messages and blocked her number. Whatever she was dealing with now, it wasn't my problem anymore. When I walked back inside, Hannah was in the kitchen, humming softly as she wiped down the counters. The scent of fresh coffee filled the air, and I smiled, feeling that warmth settle into my chest again. This was what mattered now. This was my life. "Everything okay?" Hannah asked, glancing up as I walked in. "Yeah," I said, leaning against the counter. "Everything's perfect." She smiled, but I could tell she knew there was something more. "You sure?" she asked, her perceptiveness showing. I nodded. Positive. Dinner that night was simple but perfect. Just the two of us sitting at the counter, talking about the day's work and making plans for the diner. The conversation flowed easily, as it always did with Hannah. No drama, no hidden agendas, just us. After dinner, we sat by the window, watching as the stars started to appear in the winter night sky. Hannah rested her head on my shoulder. For a while, we just sat there in comfortable silence, letting the quiet settle over us. I've been thinking, Hannah said softly after a while, her fingers tracing light patterns on my arm. About what? I asked, glancing down at her. About the future, she said, her voice hesitant. About what we want, what we could build here together. I nodded slowly, knowing exactly what she meant. I've been thinking about it too, I admitted. The life we were creating out here felt solid, real. The kind of life I'd always wanted, but hadn't been sure I'd ever find. I want this, Hannah, I said earnestly. I want us. And whatever that looks like, I'm all in. She looked up at me, her eyes searching mine. All in? She repeated. All in, I confirmed, my voice steady. Her lips curved into a smile. But there was something else there too, something deeper. Ryan, she said, I have something to tell you. The seriousness in her tone caught me off guard. I sat up a little straighter, my heart suddenly racing. What is it? I asked. Hannah hesitated, her hand tightening around mine. I wasn't sure when the right time would be to tell you, she began nervously. But well, there's no easy way to say this, so I'm just going to come out with it. I braced myself, my mind already jumping to worst-case scenarios. Was she in more trouble than I thought? Was Cooper coming after the diner in a way we hadn't anticipated? But then Hannah took a deep breath and smiled. A smile that was nervous but full of hope. I'm pregnant, she said softly. Her words hung in the air between us. For a moment, I wasn't sure if I'd heard her right. Pregnant? I repeated, stunned. Wait, you're... She nodded, her eyes shimmering with a mix of fear and excitement. I found out a few days ago, she explained. I wasn't sure how you'd feel about it, but well, there it is. I stared at her, my chest tightening in a way I hadn't expected. Pregnant. A baby. My baby. Our baby. I know it's a lot, she said quickly, misreading my silence. If you're not ready for this, I understand. I didn't let her finish. I pulled her into my arms, holding her close as the realization settled over me. I'm ready, I whispered into her hair. I'm more than ready. Hannah let out a shaky breath, her arms tightening around me. Are you sure? She asked, still uncertain. I pulled back just enough to meet her gaze, my heart full of emotion. I'm sure, I said confidently. We got this. Whatever comes next, we've got this. And for the first time in a long time, I knew that was true. We were building something real, something solid, a future, a family, together. The past was behind me, and the future was full of possibilities.